I have been a Zelda fan for a long time now. Pretty much since 2011 when Ocarina of Time 3D came out, I have been a Zelda fan. After 2011 and I got my Zelda fix with Ocarina of Time, I got Wind Waker HD when that dropped in 2013, and from that point onward, I kind of started playing every single re-release they had, every single Zelda game that I could gain access to. And I've played a lot of games in the process. Not every game, to be perfectly fair. Wand of Gamelon still eludes me. And same with the rest of the CDI games, which, I don't know, maybe I'll get around those someday. But the point is, I've played a lot of Zelda games, and I've seen a lot of Zelda experiences, and I know that, for the most part, throughout the entire lifespan of the Zelda franchise, there's been this consistency since A Link to the Past, so since the third game in the franchise. And that consistency was broken just immediately with Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild was just a complete change of image. There was still a lot of stuff that felt very Zelda remaining in the package, but it was just not the Zelda everybody has come to know and love. A Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, Wind Waker, Skyward Sword, even, all share a very distinct and similar formula. There are ways that they differ, a lot of ways that each individual game differs, but for the most part, they share the same formula. And a lot of people, when Breath of the Wild was released, were very distraught about Breath of the Wild changing that formula and becoming something completely different. And understandably so. Again, for a long time, the franchise has been straight up the same thing, just from 2D to 3D, with slight changes, with different dungeons. Generally speaking, though, they shared a lot of commonalities. And with Breath of the Wild 2, what interests me so much about this game isn't so much the fact that it exists and it's sharing the same world and it's kind of going for a Majora's Mask thing, which hasn't been done in a long time. What really interests me is what it means for the Zelda franchise going forward. I know a lot of people have talked about how Breath of the Wild is changing things, how Breath of the Wild has taken this series and shifted it into something completely different, but Breath of the Wild was kind of like a stepping stone, right? Breath of the Wild was the start of something new, but it's not what the series is going to fall into place as. It's not going to be indicative of what the rest of the series is going to be. It is going to be a baseline moving forward. That is true, but it won't be indicative of what the rest of the series has to offer. What makes Breath of the Wild 2 so interesting is the potential it has for dungeons, for bringing traditional Zelda elements back from those games that, did share all these commonalities, bringing some of those commonalities, some of those elements back, and introducing them to the Breath of the Wild formula. That is what can potentially make Breath of the Wild 2 super interesting. That's what I'm interested in, primarily. I think the game looks beautiful. Link with his hair down is hot as fuck. Him phasing through the ground is sick, because I really want to hope, I really want to believe that that's not just some thing that happens. It's not how you teleport to the sky. I'm really hoping it's an actual power that you can use, and that would make for some insane dungeon design. That would be insane. Some alterations of the original powers that were in Breath of the Wild 1 are already being shown off, which is super fun. I'm really excited to see what new outfits they have, if Zelda is really playable, which, guys, I really doubt, but, there's still a chance. We haven't seen everything yet. There's so much potential for really cool things, but I think the most interesting potential is the stuff we don't know yet, the stuff that hasn't been teased, the dungeons. The dungeons are what is going to make or break these future iterations of Zelda. If they can recapture what people loved about dungeons from Ocarina of Time all the way up to Skyward Sword, that is going to save the series for a lot of people. Because I know there's a fuckload of people who hate, and I mean hate, the direction of Breath of the Wild. So I made this video a while ago about Breath of the Wild and how it was potentially a bad Zelda game. I kind of talked about why I didn't like that argument and why I think that Breath of the Wild still carries over some of the stuff that traditional Zelda games had while adding a new spin on them. And a lot of people, and I mean a lot of people, got mad about that. Pretty much everybody who's not a consistent commenter on my videos was like, "You're a fucking idiot." This isn't an uncommon sentiment at all. A lot of people think Breath of the Wild completely butchered the original Zelda formula. And I understand why there's this kind of concern, because really, truly, Breath of the Wild did change something that has been going on for, at this point, decades. Zelda 1 is 35 years old. And more importantly, A Link to the Past is 30 years old. That's when this whole kind of formula started. That's when this idea that kind of carried on throughout the rest of the series, this traditional standard formula started. And Breath of the Wild just tossed out 35 fucking years of tradition. I don't have a problem with that. I love Breath of the Wild. I love the direction the series is taking. I don't have a problem with that. But people sure as hell will. And people sure as hell did. Breath of the Wild was received well, generally. It was received very well. But people still hated it as a Zelda game. Right? People like Skyward Sword as a Zelda game more than they like Breath of the Wild, despite the fact that Skyward Sword was received significantly worse, despite the fact that they all have this massive hate boner for Skyward Sword. Like, a lot of people still like Skyward Sword more as a Zelda game, because it retains that formula, you know? Breath of the Wild keeps some of that tradition, keeps some of those values. There are things that remain consistent, but they do change at the same time. Elements from previous Zelda games have been carried over, but they've been changed to the point where they do divert from that traditional formula. Breath of the Wild is an evolution of the formula, and kind of getting back to the main point, Breath of the Wild 2 will really see if this formula can stand the test of time. We will be able to see with Breath of the Wild 2 if Nintendo is capable of getting those people that they initially lost with Breath of the Wild back into the series. And that's a big deal, because this could be a relatively decent portion of the fan base completely and totally isolated from the series as a whole. Unless there's like remakes or remasters like Skyward Sword, which isn't doing a great job of getting people back into the series anyway. But this could be the make it or break it moment for Zelda. And I think that right there is what makes Breath of the Wild 2 so interesting. Not the fact that Breath of the Wild 1 slapped so hard. Not the fact that we have some really interesting powers, some really interesting takes on what Breath of the Wild did. And we've seen that just from the start. Not the fact that we have this kind of new, interesting art style with like some of the ancient machines. No. Not any of that cool shit. What really gets me excited is the potential Breath of the Wild 2 has to bring back some of the more traditional elements that we like better dungeon design, more concise, consolidated dungeon design that actually leads to like maybe 40 to 50 minutes of dungeon play rather than just kind of like 20 to 30 minutes, you're done, and there's only 4 of them. What's so interesting is the potential. It's all about the potential. And I really hope that Nintendo can bring back that fan base that they kind of lost with Breath of the Wild 1. Partly so I don't have to hear people complain anymore. I will be honest, that's kind of part of it. But it's also that I think a combination of the more traditional formula that has been built upon for decades and this new interesting experimental formula. I think a combination of those two can create something so interesting and so beneficial for the series that I'm super excited. It's super exciting, and I really want to see where Breath of the Wild 2 goes, because there's so much potential there. But hey, if you sat through this video and listened to me ramble, maybe agreed with some of what I said, there's something you can do down below. I think like only 0.5% of you are subscribed. But yeah, thank you for watching. I appreciate your time, and I hope to see you in whatever I make next. But only if you turn on the bell notification and like and subscribe and do all that wacky, tacky bullshit.